Today we'll be doing something a little bit different compared to the usual slot. This is an explanation of how to ghaz using the Custodes team for demonstration purposes. Now, ghaz is a legacy boss. He was released over 2 years ago, and he's a low armor and mobile boss that is very predictable, and his attacks are either easy to avoid and or not very damaging. So he was designed against the summoner meta of the time, and of course the meta has moved on a lot since then. He's a very easy boss to get decent damage in, even with off-meta teams. So the best teams to use against him are the Custodes, with the multi-hit being a budget option, and I'll include a link to Painhawk's video, so he has a run using a multi-hit team, in the description. You can see that we're using Ragnar as the 5th character here, as he excels against low armor bosses. The Newer Throat team is not preferred here, so it's usually used against high armor bosses that deal a lot of damage in melee. Generally, you will see it against something like a Mythic Mortarion, or a Mythic Avatar of Cain, and so it's not really preferred here. Its damage ceiling isn't that high. The mech team is also not really that good here. It's best at pummeling stationary or slower moving bosses, so it's going to be difficult to use against ghaz, which is quite mobile. And additionally, ghaz also has a damage reduction after receiving a certain number of attacks a turn. And the mech team does rely on having a lot of summons and then triggering a lot of follow-up attacks from Exeter Row. And so that's another reason why it's not really the best team against ghaz. The sequence of Ghazghull's abilities are as follows. So in turn 2, he'll use Here We Go, which is a charge. In turn 3, he needs more Dakka. In turn 4, he'll use the Great Wa, which is a summon ability. And after he summons, he will perform a melee attack. In turn 5, he will charge again. Now, unless he can't charge. If he can't charge, he will perform a melee attack, and we'll elaborate on this later on in the video. And in turn 6, he'll perform a melee attack again. So let's talk about his various abilities. Firstly, let's look at Here We Go, which is a charge. He'll mark 2 columns of 5 hexes long in one direction. So you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, the photo there, that ghaz is charging towards the upper left, and on the right side photo, ghaz is charging downwards. And he'll mark it, let's say he'll use his ability in turn 2, and he charges at the beginning of the next turn. So let's say he uses this ability in turn 2, which he usually does. He'll charge at the beginning of the next turn. So you have 1 full turn to move your units out of the way. Now the charge is not blocked by units in the path. He'll just move right over those units. And if you have any units caught within the charge, they'll be stunned. And additionally, they'll take direct damage, which is 100% pierce. The charge damage is quite significant, and so this is one reason to avoid being in his path. And even if you want to try to take that damage to get below 50% health for the Custodes team and Dante's buff, I would generally avoid doing that too, because stun is quite punishing. If your units get stunned, they'll be restricted to a movement of 1, and they also can't use their active ability, and this means that they might miss out on an attack on ghaz next turn. And it also might ruin your ability timing if you're using the Custodes team. Now the charge will try to target as many units as possible, so if there are multiple different possible directions that ghaz can charge in, he'll pick the direction that allows him to mark the hexes with the most number of player units on it. And additionally, ghaz cannot mark hexes out of bounds, because he will end up at the end of the charge line. So after he charges, the next turn he will move into the end of the charge line. So he can't exist out of bounds, obviously, so he can't mark hexes out of bounds. The next active ability we'll talk about is Needs More Dakka, where he fires in a cone shape in front of him. So just like the charge, he will mark the hexes that he will fire in, and then he will fire into those hexes the next turn. So usually he will mark the hexes in turn 3, and he will fire into those hexes at the beginning of turn 4. Now the attacks are low pierce, and they don't really do that much damage. So it's one option to try to get below 50% health for the Custodes team. Another point to note is that Needs More Dakka does double damage to units adjacent to Ghazghull. But even so, it doesn't really hurt, even at a mythic level, with your characters adjacent to Ghazghull. Most of the time, a max team will be able to survive a mythic Ghazghull's Needs More Dakka. So yeah, this ability does not hurt at all. Just like the charge, this ability tries to target as many units as possible, and it can't mark hexes out of bounds. So let's look at the bottom left corner as an example. So Ghaz, this is a photo taken at the end of turn 2, beginning of turn 3, so before Ghazghull moves. So he's about to move and use Needs More Dakka. So out of the 3 highlighted options, he will not move into the blue hex and he will not move into the purple location. And the reason is, if he moves into those 2 locations, the cones, the arcs he will mark out in front of him will have hexes that are out of bounds. So if you look at the blue cone, there will be 1 hex that's out of bound. And if you look at the purple cone, there will be 2 hexes that are out of bounds. And Ghaz can't mark hexes that are out of bounds. And so Ghaz will move into the green location, as you can see, going towards the bottom right-hand side corner. Now the final active ability is the Great Wa, and it's a summon ability that will summon 1 Stormboy for each player unit on the map. For example, if you have 5 characters, such as the Custodes team, he'll summon 5 Stormboys. If you have 5 characters plus 3 Spore Mines, he'll summon 8 Stormboys. So this ability was designed as a counter to the Summoner meta 2 years ago. Additionally, he also summons Orc Boys, if Tank Smash isn't dead. The Stormboys have a chance to fly up off-map if they move through more hexes, so there's quite a bit of RNG involved with the Stormboys. But even so, they don't really do that much damage, even at unless you get to a mythic level. The Stormboys can be killed by Karn to activate his passive. Now let's move on to his passive abilities. The first one is the Prophet of Gork and Mork, and it's a damage reduction ability that triggers after he receives 4 attacks in a turn. Now this can be increased to 7 attacks after you kill a Tank Smasher. So once again, it's an anti-summon mechanic. So it prevents you from using a bajillion Guardsmen and Bloodletters against Ghazghull, but that's all outdated anyways. Now Karn's active counts as 3 attacks. There's a piercing, eviscerating, and plasma portions. They count as 3 separate attacks. Karn and Crayon's passive is also counted as a separate attack to their normal and active attack. So if you count your Karn 2 attacks, if you don't use his active, Crayon will use 2 attacks, Ragnar 1 attack, that's 5, and then you add Dante and Triton, that's 7 attacks in total. And that's just barely enough to not trigger the Prophet of Gork and Mork. But if you add in something else like a Galatian, that might smack Ghaz, or if you add in some Biovores Spore Mines, since you're trying to get the Spore Mines passive ability, then some of your characters will have to attack into the damage reduction. So you should always attack with your DPS first, in the order of Ragnar, Crayon, Karn. Okay, so Ragnar goes first because he just has 1 attack. Crayon goes next because his passive is the most powerful ability in your team, and you don't want to miss out on that damage. And then Karn goes third, before the 2 supports. The next passive ability is Proper Killy. So it's essentially a modification on Ghaz's normal melee attack, and it's sort of a behavioral modification as well. So he will preferentially target the player unit with the highest current health. So if you're using Galatian, it will probably be Galatian, assuming he's leveled. If you're not using Galatian, and let's say you're using the Custodes team, the unit with the most health will probably be Ragnar. And so these are the targets that Ghaz will try to attack in melee. And his melee attack is a sweep attack that uses the stats of his normal melee attack. So I'll include a video in the bottom right corner, so you guys can see what's going on. Now, if Tank Smasher isn't dead, his normal melee attack will also stun units hit, and it will also do a lot of extra power damage. It's something like 60% of the character's health. And that can ruin a lot of runs, especially the stun, because that will prevent a Custodes team from using abilities, which is central to a Custodes team's gameplay. So, yeah, if you're trying to maximize damage, I would really suggest killing Tank Smasher. Okay, now there's also the bosses watching, which lets orcs next to Ghaz ignore battle fatigue, do more damage. It's not really that important. Moving on. Now this is the meat of the video, which is the positioning. Now, just as with any melee team, even if you're using the multi-hit team, the approach will still be, let's say the mech team, the approach will still be the same with any boss. And that is, we're trying to get Ghaz next to high ground, so our damage dealers can take the bonus damage that high ground gives, right? And so, ideally, we will be able to pin Ghaz in a corner, so your DPS can just keep pummeling from the high ground. Now, normally this is not possible because Ghaz will use charge in turn 5 and then he'll just escape your pin. He'll just charge right through your blockade. However, in smaller maps such as this one, it's possible to pin Ghaz in the corner. And why is that? Well, we know that Ghaz can't charge out of bounds, right? He can't mark hexes out of bounds. And in this situation, you can see that either direction Ghaz tries to charge into, he'll end up with hexes out of bounds. And so he can't charge in either of those directions. And even if Ghaz tries to move back and then charge, you can see that both charge directions include an out of bounds hex. And so our charge is not possible, and Ghaz will instead use his normal melee attack in turn 5. Now here I used Galatian to complete the pin. You can also pin with Bellator if you're using a multi-hit team. I'll include an example in description. It's a run by Painhawk, I believe. And additionally, you can also try to pin using Biovore. And you might want to use Biovore instead because Biovore has a damage amp if you get Biovore to Mythic. Now, what happens if you can't pin Ghaz? Well, you can't pin Ghaz if Ghaz has 5 tiles to charge into, if he's in the corner. Right, so this happens in some of the bigger maps. It also happens if you try to pin Ghaz, if you try to surround Ghaz fully in the middle of the map, you probably won't be able to fully surround Ghaz. And if you can't fully surround a boss, he will be able to fit through that one hex gap that you leave and squirrel away and charge anyways. And so in these two situations, you can't pin Ghaz. And if you can't pin Ghaz, you need to manipulate his charge direction to make sure he ends up in a location that allows him to move back next to high ground. Now, an example, let's look at the first example. This is a screenshot taken from the end of turn 4, beginning of turn 5. So there are 2 possible charge lines. So Ghaz is currently in the red spot, and he can either move to the green location and charge towards the top right, or he can move to the black location and charge downwards. Which charge line do you think we would prefer? Now the answer is, we would prefer the green charge line. So yeah, we would prefer the green charge line over the black charge line. Now we know that turn 6 is a normal melee attack, and that Ghaz will attempt to melee the unit with the highest health. In this case it's Galatian, or Ragnar if your Galatian isn't really that high level. And the final turn 5 / beginning of turn 6 location, in the green charge line, so you can see towards the right over here, Ghaz ends up here. He can move 3 hexes back between the 3 high ground tiles and attack Galatian and Ragnar in melee. And this is what we would prefer because we want all 3 of our DPS, which are Ragnar, Crayon, and Karn, to each have a high ground hex to attack from. So this is what we would like Ghaz to do. In comparison, if Ghaz chooses the black charge line, he'll end up at the bottom of the map at the beginning of turn 6, as I've labeled on the photo. And from this location, it's not possible for Ghaz to move back between the 3 high ground hexes and melee attack Galatian, as that would require 4 hexes movement, while Ghaz can only move 3 hexes normally. And I forgot what Ghaz would do in this situation. He would either range attack Galatian, or he would try to attack the unit with the highest health that he can reach in melee. But either way, he won't move back under the 3 high ground hexes, which means you're going to lose out on damage. Now, how do we force Ghaz to charge into the green line? The answer is by positioning our characters. You can see that with this positioning, there are 3 units inside the green charge line, which are Trajan, Karn, and Crayon. Meanwhile, the black charge line only has 2 of my units in it, which are Trajan and Karn. And since Ghaz will always choose the charge line that has the most units in it, he will pick the green charge line, which is preferable for us. Now, let's look at another example. This photo was taken at the end of turn 4 from another map. So we want Ghaz to charge upwards, so he ends up next to the 3 high ground tiles at the beginning of turn 6. You can see here that I have 5 units on the green charge line. The other possible charge line, which is the black charge line, shown on screen here, only has 4 units in its path. So there's Trajan, Karn, Crayon, and the Spore Mine. And so, between these 2 options, Ghaz will pick the green charge line, which is preferable to us. Now, once Ghaz ends up next to the ledge at the beginning of turn 6, we want him to stay there instead of moving off somewhere else. And we do this by moving the highest health unit, in this case it would be Ragnar, onto the ledge during turn 5. And then Ghaz will attack Ragnar in melee in turn 6, and thus he'll remain next to the ledge. And that is it for today's video. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.